Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever and whenever you are listening. Welcome to this episode of the Two Lost Souls podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing all things high intensity CBT for children and young people. As usual, I am joined in the therapy room today by the sensational Michelle Sudbury. How are you doing, Shell?
Hello, Ravi. I'm really good, thank you. How are you today?
I am good. I'm good. What's going on with you?
I've spent the day doing inductions with our new high intensity trainees, so I've had a very lovely day, thank you. It's been great.
I'm presuming you wouldn't want to out them in any way, but were there any listeners amongst that cohort?
Not yet, but I have obviously made them take down the link so they can go and listen to all of our episodes because they're going to be really helpful for their journey, I think.
Yeah, hopefully so. Lots of new starts then. So the strange thing about this show is that it's kind of like a full circle moment in many ways today, because we are interviewing Sam Froudist, who, as well as being a high intensity CBT therapist for children and young people, was one of the first listeners we ever had. So that's one full circle. The other full circle being that part of the reason this podcast started was about my training journey, I guess. And today I met my first supervisee.
Wow, my goodness. How was
I know.
that?
It was kind of scary, but kind of good. Like it was just a short introductory catch up, so there was no pressure or anything. It feels really strange, exciting, but really strange to now be sitting in the other chair. Like it's one of those things that I think you go through at the end of the training year, right? Where I've done my supervisor training, and now the training wheels are technically coming off, and now I'm tasked with delivering sound, clinical reasoning to the person in front of me. So it's an interesting time. Again, an incredibly full circle day for the pod today, and it feels like we're coming of age in a strange kind of way.
I love this. I've watched you grow. So amazing. Ravi, do you have a qualified therapist to supervise, or are you supervising a trainee? Or?
No, I'm supervising a trainee.
Oh, wow, the best. That's great.
So we really will be two lost souls, like, which, funnily enough, was some kind of post hoc rationale for the name that we chose. Shell and I just immediately chose it based on the Pink Floyd lyric. But I did come up with some kind of strange post hoc reasoning around, well, it's just like the supervisor trainee relationship, right? And now I get to feel it, which is really weird.
Oh,
I feel like I'm flying the nest.
Yeah, it's a strange feeling, Ravi. You've kind of like, you're all grown up. It's amazing. They're very lucky to have you. I think that's going to be fabulous. And I can't wait for us to talk more about this in future episodes, hopefully.
I know. I feel like I'm in a strange, like, flashback episode of a sitcom. There was a show on, I think, the Disney Channel called The Wonder Years.
Yeah, of course, Fred Savage.
Yeah, and then they've brought that back again with the same lead character as his older self, kind of looking back at particular moments and stuff. It kind of feels like that.
Fred Savage is back.
I think so. Well, yeah, it was a couple of years ago. I don't know whether the ratings were good.
That idea doesn't sound great, let's be honest. I think the whole joy of that show is the kind of cute kid in it, right? Not some, 40-year-old bloke who's...
Possibly.
Yeah.
But it kind of feels like that in terms of reliving my own training experiences vicariously through someone else.
Amazing. I love that.
While simultaneously being on my own training experience again. It's so weird.
Ugh. Yeah.
There's way too many layers to this, and I think I've overdone the analysis of it. If anyone listening would like to suggest any ideas for the show, please get in touch at hello@twolostsouls.co.uk. We are still at different social media website things, so we are on Twitter, I'm still calling it that, and we are on Instagram at @TLS_pod. If you're on Blue Sky, we are not TLS_pod. We are TLS pod because they don't allow underscores. How dare they? However, hello@twolostsouls.co.uk is probably the best way of getting hold of us if you want to suggest anything. We also have some very interesting projects in the works, both for trainee therapists. Well, I say trainee therapists, pre-trainee therapists, actually. So if anyone is having to go through the dreaded KSA, there may be an offering that we are coming up for you in relation to that. And it's not podcast based, but it is something a bit more interactive, hopefully, that you'll find helpful. And also something for more established therapists as well. I won't say too much about that or anything about that. No spoilers with that one. But as soon as we are allowed to share more, we will do. Please sign up to the Two Lost Souls mailing list, as we are backing away a little bit from social media because of the mean people who tend to buy and run these platforms. We are transitioning more towards direct communication, and it's lovely because we can build a community of like-minded souls. And you can reply to those emails at any time and have a dialogue with us, which is wonderful. So please sign up to the mailing list at www.twolostsouls.co.uk. We will include a link in the show notes as well. If you'd prefer to just tap something rather than type a whole URL in, we would do that too. So we have the pleasure of being joined in the therapy room today by Sam Froudist. Sam was, funnily enough, one of the first ever listeners to the Two Lost Souls podcast, and she currently works as a high intensity CBT therapist working with children and young people. Firstly, Sam, welcome to Two Lost Souls. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing really well. I'm glad to be here.
Obviously, we've spoken there about the journey. Obviously, you were listening to Two Lost Souls podcast. I'm sure people may be able to take from that that's when you were on the training journey to become a high intensity CBT therapist. Give us a bit of background in terms of your career, in terms of what inspired you to take this path.
So I actually started listening even before I'd started the training because I was like, need to get prepared. So by way of background, so I'm a former teacher. So I trained in secondary education, but worked mostly in primary education. And then after I kind of started having my family, I found that I really couldn't sustain that kind of work. I couldn't be the kind of teacher that I wanted to be, and I couldn't be the parent that I wanted to be. So I kind of made the shift into wellbeing work. So I worked with like a local third sector organisation for a few years, kind of delivering pretty low intensity wellbeing interventions for children, kind of across the southeast. And then it must have been towards the end of the latter part of 2022 that some kind of recruit to train positions became available in the organisation. I started thinking about that more seriously. I found the podcast and started to listen to that, what that looked like. And then I started my training in January 2023. And I did like a 1-year postgraduate diploma, finished that in the December of the 2023. And then in January 24, I started working for a Tier 3 CAMHS service in the Southeast. And that's where I kind of still am today, working, with children with kind of complex and enduring mental health conditions in our CAMHS service.
That is amazing. What did you make of the training journey? What was that year like for you in terms of the intensity of workload, in terms of how you found that step up?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It was a really difficult year. And I think I had underestimated what it is like going from a kind of a position of like relative competence in your role to kind of going back to being a beginner and going back to that kind of conscious incompetence of learning new skills. That's really hard. And I think I had really little children at the time. So I think my eldest was 5 and my youngest was just a toddler as I was training. So juggling that was pretty full on as well. But I absolutely loved my training year. I had a fantastic training year. I loved learning. My service were really supportive. So it was definitely a stretching year, but I knew kind of once I got into the thick of the training that I had found like the thing that I was supposed to be doing with my life. And yeah, I had a really good experience. But I suppose for lots of the children and young people's courses, they're structured in a little bit of a different way to adults, I presume. I mean, I've not done the adults, but from what I've known, but my particular course is not accredited. And so to kind of complete the accreditation process, you have to do that once you've finished training. And that was kind of via the KSA route, because teaching isn't considered to be a core profession. So in some ways, like the post-grad was really the start of the journey of training and accreditation. There was still lots of work to do over the course of 2024. Yeah, so that was a bit of a challenge as well.
I can imagine it was. Can I ask how you balanced all of that stuff? It sounds at points like you were sort of spinning plates.
Yeah, with great difficulty. I'm not sure I did an amazing job. I'm really fortunate that I have some family that are really supportive and help me out. Well, help not just me, but my family out, my husband, with childcare and things like that. And yeah, it was difficult. I think, I mean, knowing, I didn't really realise it at the time, but now working in kind of an NHS service and seeing the kind of difference between a trainee position and kind of a substantive post, I do really understand now that like as a trainee, you're kind of protected from certain elements or realities of the job, which I probably didn't realise at the time. So, you know, your focus is your caseload and you've got kind of external support. So that did help, even though I kind of didn't realise it at the time.
Sam, was it an easy decision for you to make to decide to have your mental health career predominantly with children? Or did you ever kind of consider stepping back from, particularly after you'd just come out of a classroom as well, stepping back from working with children and going into adult services?
Not really ever, to be honest. I absolutely love working with children and young people. I think it's such a privilege. And, you know, that's one aspect of teaching that I really, really miss, is this sense of like having my kids and my classroom. And the kind of wellbeing role that I was in involved travelling around to different schools. And that was really fantastic for kind of flexibility, work-life balance. But it also can be really isolating because you don't really have this sense of being a part of a wider team. And so that was really difficult. But no, I've never really thought about necessarily working with adults. I wouldn't rule it out ever, but I love working with adolescents. I think it's such a privilege. You can be a part of a child's life just as they're starting to kind of work out their own identity. And that's a real privilege, but a huge responsibility as well. And I think the first time that really hit me, this is kind of prior to mental health, was, you know, teaching a lesson, an RE lesson, and we were talking about Buddhism, and I asked the class who'd heard of Buddhism, and no one had. And these were little kids in primary school, and I just thought, oh, okay, so this lesson is like your first introduction to like a worldwide religion. And like it just really hit me. I was like, oh, I've got to do a really good job then. And then after that point, I kind of took that role really seriously. The words we say as adults in young people's lives, you know, I think we probably can all think of like a cutting remark an adult has made in our childhood that still brings up like really vivid emotions now as adults as well. And so, yeah, I suppose I wanted to be kind of remembered as someone who was a really positive force in a child's life. I mean, if they don't remember me, I don't really mind, but I'd rather be a force for good rather than someone who's like the source of one of those like hideous memories that we all have. Yeah,
Oh, definitely. The amount of times I've treated social anxiety in adults, and it seemed to have some sort of root in a critical incident that's occurred at the age of, 9 or 10, reading in front of the entire class.
Yeah.
And then the teacher following that up with some kind of comment. I'm wondering, I mean, speaking about teaching, how well did you feel that equipped you for the wellbeing role that you ended up in after teaching? In terms of, I can obviously appreciate that there's contact with children and communicating with children in a way, but I'm just wondering, in terms of the kind of emotional intelligence and kind of that sense of assistance when it comes to particular presenting problems, how did you develop that knowledge at the time, and how well supported did you feel by your background in teaching at that occasion?
Oh gosh, that's another great question. I think it was a really rich training ground for me. I think like you're basically public speaking for 6 hours a day as a teacher, and with like hecklers who don't want to be there. So, you know, you learn to think on your feet quite quickly and kind of respond to like the young people that are in front of you. And also, I suppose, teaching on a good day is very much in that kind of coaching role. So you're not trying to like drag a young person to the learning. You're kind of supporting them to find it out by themselves. So I think in that respect, it was really good. Also, in terms of like working with parents, I feel really comfortable. And then in my role in CAMHS, now kind of liaising more with schools. You know, I think that grounding in education has been really helpful in terms of thinking about plans that are kind of realistic for schools to support, where there might be kind of additional needs that we might need to think about a bit more carefully. And also kind of that robust challenge, like in professionals meetings. I feel mostly confident in those meetings, but you never know. So I think that was really helpful. I think in ways it was a bit challenging is kind of the Socratic style of CBT. I definitely, like, that was consistent feedback in my training year, and I'm sure I still do it. I can kind of veer on the didactic and being like, I can easily see this is the thing that you need to do. So that's a little bit of something that I've had to work on quite a bit to kind of rein myself in from trying to control them. But yeah, I think it definitely helped, but it's kind of not without its challenges too.
Sam, I'm a parent, and I think that's something that I've always been a little bit wary of. So when I worked as a counsellor, I worked with children who had experienced bereavement, and I was always terrified of going into mom mode and that kind of role being blurred. How do you manage that?
It's really difficult because the kind of children that I see in my service can present with like some really serious and complex trauma. And the ones that kind of invoke the mum mode in me, I try and really pay attention to what that is in me that they're kind of calling out. And because it's not appropriate. I mean, you know, there are qualities in me that are totally appropriate that I think make me a good therapist, that kind of sense of empathy and nurturing and compassion. And I think also being a parent makes me much more compassionate of the parents of the children that come to our service. That's not to say that people who aren't parents aren't compassionate therapists. I don't mean that at all. But I think if I think back to my time as a teacher before I was a parent and who I am now as a parent, I have just a totally different understanding of the reasons why parents kind of get to the point where they are. So I think I'm much more compassionate. So not all of the parts of mum mode I think are unhelpful, but I just have to pay really close attention to what that is. And, you know, I think everyone's had those cases where you're like, this one's I just can't seem to let this one go, or I just can't seem to say like, we're at the end of therapy, and like noticing that and kind of taking that to either my one-to-one supervision or peer supervision, I think is really fantastic for that sort of stuff. So like, what is it? Getting to the root of what that is. Yeah, it's tricky.
Also wondering about other individuals in your cohort as well, Sam. We've spoken about your experience and background briefly earlier on. Could you walk me through the other kinds of professional experiences that other people on your course had? I'm just thinking here about people who may be in the same position as you were when you started listening to Two Lost Souls, maybe considering a career as a high intensity CBT therapist working in children with young people. What are the sorts of backgrounds that it's expected that they could come from to be able to be in a role like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that dissimilar to kind of what I notice in adult services as well. So we have lots of kind of occupational therapists, lots of mental health nurses, but we also have lots of counsellors and, you know, again, lots of teachers as well, kind of moving into that space as well. I think kind of the benefit of like doing an unaccredited course is that they can be a bit more flexible with the kind of admission criteria. So some people whose experience might not be acceptable to an accredited kind of course can kind of get, you know, reach the KSA standards through by the end of the unaccredited postgrad. So you do get a bit more diverse. We've had some early help workers as well. Yeah, it can be really, really diverse. But I suppose for my particular course, the critical thing was that you had lots of experience working directly with children and young people in a kind of wellbeing or mental health space, not just purely education or not just purely kind of from a medical point of view either.
Just as a follow-up to that, Sam, you mentioned that you then had to go down the KSA route.
Yeah.
Because teachers aren't considered to be a core profession. Do you know what would be considered to be a core profession?
So, oh gosh, you're testing me on my knowledge now. I mean, the KSA, there's no separate KSA for children and young people courses compared to an adults. So the criteria is the same. Yeah, again, we're thinking mental health nurses, ITs, social workers. Actually, that's one I didn't mention before, lots of social workers. And I think previously, a couple of years maybe prior to my training year, teachers with the kind of additional special educational needs masters, that was considered a core profession, but that has now kind of stopped and that doesn't count anymore. So yeah, the accreditation progress is just as rigorous for children and young people as it is for adult people who've trained with adults. Yeah.
You spoke a couple of moments ago again about having more flexibility on a non-accredited course to perhaps have an intake of individuals who might not make an accredited course. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the intake journey that you had, what was that level of competitiveness like to actually get a place on the course in the first place?
Yeah, do you know what? I feel really lucky in that I interviewed my first time and I got a position my first time. I also interviewed with the service that I already worked with. And, you know, I think it was still a really rigorous interview process. But, you know, I was in my kind of comfort zone in terms of the staff that were interviewing me. And so it does make a difference. It doesn't mean I was guaranteed a role, not by any stretch. But I know that since then it has become very much more competitive. And I think kind of across the sector, we're seeing kind of recruitment freezes and things like that, and a move from offering kind of the traineeship as a kind of moving into a substantive post kind of automatically. They're very much more kind of fixed term contracts now. And so it does make it quite competitive. You know, the stakes are quite high, I think, for kind of professionals moving into that space and kind of thinking about what their next steps are. We have one NHS trust covering my area in the southeast. And so if you want to train within the NHS, it's one trust. And then there are a couple of third sector organisations that also have recruit to train contracts. So there's not much movement in terms of where you can train if you're in my kind of geographical area in the southeast.
Can I ask as well, earlier on you mentioned underestimating that journey of, you know, being in a role in which you are incredibly competent, you can probably do in your sleep, to becoming consciously incompetent, I guess, and consciously wanting to develop your knowledge in an area. Can I ask how you navigated that feeling really early on, and how did you notice that developing over the course of that training year?
Oh my God, I just cried a lot. I cried and cried and cried all the time. That's how I coped. You've just got to go for it though, don't you? And I think I'm a fairly confident person, and maybe that makes it seem that I find that easier than other people. But no one really likes being vulnerable, but you just have to go for it. And so like I really made the most of my kind of practice tutor group. And I think if you can take that first step to be like, oh, maybe showing a clip of, you know, a session that's absolutely tanked, and like you make that first move, then other people feel a bit more comfortable doing that as well. So I just, you know, I felt that this was a fantastic opportunity it's something I really, really wanted. And I think in terms of the wider context of my personal life, I'd just come out of like the really early baby years. And, you know, I'm the kind of person that my job is not just my job that I rock up 9 to 5. My work is part of my identity. And I'd just come out of, you know, having really small children and taking a bit of a sidestep in terms of my career and kind of navigating what that felt like and looked like in my kind of hip, and feeling kind of a bit like stifled and like just treading water for a couple of years. And then I'd had this opportunity kind of present itself to me. It didn't really present itself to me, that I'd achieved this opportunity. And I just felt like I was finally like getting some traction. And I just really wasn't prepared to let that go or not make the most of it. And so I just wanted to go absolutely full throttle for that year and chuck myself into it. And, you know, it wasn't easy. There were kind of difficulties that I had along the way, interpersonal conflicts that I'd had along the way that were really difficult. And also, you know, in the university that I went to, it was quite prestigious. And I felt really out of my depth. Like, I'm Australian. I haven't studied in the UK before. It was university's different in Australia. Like it just felt really different when I rocked up in day one, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure I belong here. But it was just, I don't know, a bit of self CBT of like feel the fear and do it anyway, like just go for it. And thankfully, I had a soft landing and I had a really supportive practice tutor group. I had a really experienced clinical supervisor, and she was really good at like keeping me on the straight and narrow. And I had managed to kind of get a caseload who kind of wanted to be in treatment. So it kind of, all the kind of pieces came together, but I know that doesn't happen for everybody. So there was a little bit of luck there as well.
Sam, when you were talking, I was thinking that you seem to have also come at it with a good sense of humour, lots of realism, but also exactly what you just said then, that feel the fear and do it anyway energy, that I think is so crucial, isn't it, to surviving something like a high intensity training year where you are exposing all of your flaws, your kind of areas that you lack.
Oh my
You're
gosh,
vulnerable. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. It's awful. But like the worst bit of training, that which everyone always says is the showing clips of yourself, is absolutely without a doubt the best bit of training as well, because you learn so much, and you learn so much from watching other people as well. But I think, like, speaking of that kind of energy and just like going and doing it, I think being an immigrant absolutely helped with that, because, you know, I'm really privileged in that I'm white and I speak English and I've come to the UK and built a life here, but I am still an immigrant and I'm still a fish out of water in like so many spheres in the United Kingdom, or just that like 5% behind everybody else. Everyone else seems to know how things work and I'm just like walking in oblivious. But then the kind of dust settles and I feel like, oh gosh, everyone knows what to do and I don't. But I've had enough of those experiences now to know that no one kind of comes to you to say, oh, this is how you do it. This is the secret code. You have to be there in the front row putting your hand up and saying like, I don't know how to do this. What's the secret code? Can someone tell me, please? And then people do, but you really have to put yourself out there, which is easier said than done. Hence the tears.
I'm wondering if that sense of walking in oblivious can sometimes serve as a gift. I mean, as much as it can possibly feel like a curse sometimes, in terms of just wondering what your reflections were on seeing the way our mental health services are structured for the first time. What were your thoughts on that, coming from the background that you have come from?
Do you know what? I left Australia when I was 21, so I wasn't much older than a child myself, and I hadn't had much experience with the Australian system. So I can't comment on that too much, but I do know that kind of Australia appears to be a halfway house between the NHS and kind of American insurance style. And so like knowing, like, I just absolutely love the NHS, knowing that there's like free care, the kind of point of access is amazing. But yeah, I guess my understanding of what a mental health service looks like is the NHS basically. And then where I've had subsequent kind of experiences of my family back in Australia needing to access services, I've been really like shocked and surprised about how many barriers there are to kind of accessing psychological care in that sort of a system. And so I sometimes feel a bit more oblivious to the Australian system now. Speaking to that kind of sense of being oblivious, it's something that I'm aware of to an extent. I do sometimes use that kind of strategically in my work. And because I think it kind of, if you go in with kind of like, oh, preconceived ideas about this is the dynamic between a parent and a child, or this is what's happened based on a kind of a formulation that you read on paper, you can go in just like totally from the wrong angle. So sometimes going in being like, I've read stuff, but I don't know it all, or kind of not even referring to things that you've read, can actually be quite a helpful strategy to kind of get a fresh eye on kind of what's there in front of you in the room.
Testament to professional curiosity.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm wondering, Sam, obviously speaking about the start of your training journey, having seen a timetable for a local university that works with the service where I'm at, they tend to structure the year so you've got like a 3-week block at the start where you're just constantly going to university, learning, I guess, the foundations of how to put CBT skills into practice before moving on to more disorder specific stuff, basically 2 days a week as you go throughout the year. what did the structure look like for you when you were doing your training?
Yeah, it's really similar to what you described. So I think the first part of the year is very much focused on the core skills. And then at my particular university, they ran kind of a systemic trainee system course rather at the same time. And there was one other, which I can't remember what it is, the other stream. So they ran it 3 kind of recruit to train courses altogether, which were then called IAPT courses altogether. And we were all together for our kind of core skills. And we all had a similar kind of core skills assessment. And then after we'd kind of completed that module, we then separated into our modalities, where we started to think more about CBT and more about kind of disorder-specific models. But absolutely, there's a period at the beginning where you start picking up clients and you haven't had the teaching yet. And that's the bit that everyone's like, what? What do I do? What do I do? I can't do 10 sessions of core skills.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very keen to explore that with you, Sam, but I'm really intrigued based on what you said there. How did spending time with people learning other modalities sort of impact the way you think and reflect about the role that you're in and possibly your practice?
I think working with children and young people like aligns so nicely with kind of systemic family practice as well, because you cannot think of a child without thinking about the system around them as well. I presume working with adults, lots of what comes out is what's happened in their kind of family of origin as well. So like we can't even think of an adult without their system as well. So like talking to kind of systemic colleagues in the beginning, I think was really helpful and fascinating. And when we think of systems, we're not just thinking about families, we're thinking about education, we're thinking about culture, we're thinking about environment as well. So I think that was really enlightening. And, I trained in a London university, which was a lot more diverse, and kind of lots of the people from other services training there had a much more diverse kind of demographic that they were working with than I had down in the southeast. So kind of listening to them was really important and helped me kind of think about how, I thought about social graces or diversity within my own practice as well, because even though perhaps like racially it's less diverse than other areas, there's huge diversity of other kinds, and there's kind of growing cultural diversity as well within the southeast. But I was just learning, and it's not something that I'd grown up with, so I felt I really had to listen and kind of take on board what other people were saying. I had so much to learn from them,
which I'm guessing kind of takes us back full circle to that walking in oblivious point, and that being actually really a helpful thing to do without having those biases of or preconceived notions, I guess. And I suppose, again, circling back to that panic-inducing period of seeing a caseload without having had much training, obviously I can imagine us going back to the point of feel the fear and do it anyway. But what else got you through that period? How else did you cope with that? And I'm wondering what your reflections are on who you were as a practitioner in that really early stage of this.
Well, like clinical supervision absolutely got me through that place. And I think that role of the supervisor in that early period is totally critical, because they're going to be guiding what you do. And then I have seen with kind of subsequent trainees where they've not had that really strong CBT foundation in that first period, the interventions that they start at that time can be quickly derailed. And then when they come to kind of write about them in a case study, their interventions kind of all higgledy-piggledy because they've not had enough guidance. Luckily, I had loads of guidance from a really experienced CBT therapist and supervisor, so I felt I was in really good hands. But I think the only other way to get through it is to do your research, to read the paper. Like the papers, the end of your kind of university slides has a reference list, and then they're giving that to you so that you can read those papers. And I think it sounds so obvious, but that's the code. You know how I was talking earlier about like, I don't know how to do this. They're kind of not in so many words, but they're saying, this is how you do it. Read these references. And so I did that, which really, really helped. But also having come out the other side, I now understand that, again, the training year is the beginning point. And if you're not prepared to kind of do above and beyond the basic training, you're going to really struggle. And you need to be the kind of practitioner that is reading a lot, reading articles, signing up to get the papers, because, you know, a 1-year course is not enough. It's a really fantastic foundation, but it's not enough to see you through the rest of your career. You have to really be engaged in that learning. And maybe that's just my kind of style. Like, I have always been a little bit of a teacher's pet. That's just me. I really love to learn.
Your words then made me reflect a little bit on perhaps something that I'm a little bit guilty of. So I remember those days right back at the beginning of a training year where you haven't a clue what you're doing, you're fumbling your way through. And for the most part, you can bluff your way through most sessions wherever you need to. I'm guessing that's a bit more difficult with children because I have kids and they know every single time when I'm trying to kind of get something past them, or if I don't really know what I'm talking about. So that fake it till you make it tactic probably isn't going to be quite as effective, I'm thinking.
I think it kind of depends. You know, some children, you know, like to a child, all attention is good attention, right? And so if you get a child that is really seeking connection from the adults in their life, they may come to a CBT session and actually not want to engage in kind of the structured nature of it, because they, you know, the kind of actually addressing the issue does not feel possible to them. So what they want to do is actually maintain that connection that they've got with you. So they will come and quite happily just yap for 60 minutes. And we're all guilty of doing it because some of these kids are hysterical and it's really good fun. So on the flip side, sometimes you get the yappers, and on the other side, you get the kids who are like really paying attention to absolutely everything that you do. And yeah, you have to really know your stuff and you have to be willing to bring them back, but you also have to be willing to kind of like call adolescents out sometimes, or call them in, because it's like, we're coming to the session every week, not much is shifting, we're kind of dancing around actually any change methods, like what's going on here, am I missing something? Or, you know, and I suppose this also speaks to a power dynamic in working with children and adolescents, in that many children are in therapy because their parents think they need to be in therapy, or the adults in their life think they need to be in therapy. And so there's that issue of consent there with an adolescent or a child. Do they actually want to be there? And sometimes you can get, you know, 2/3 of a way through an intervention before you realise the reason we're not making any progress is because this child doesn't actually want to be here, but they're doing it because they want to comply. And they want to please the adults around them. And so when you get to that point, it's really, really difficult. You have to go so gently to kind of preserve the dignity of the child and to kind of bring that awareness to the system around them, to the parents, to think, actually, we're not going to go any further because it's not what this young person wants, and you have to hold them at the centre. They're really difficult conversations.
I can imagine. And I'm just wondering how that dialogue tends to be in general, in terms of keeping parents in the loop, in terms of needing to kind of modulate your communication and I suppose definitely not please everyone, but actually communicate effectively with everyone involved in a child's care.
It's really, really tough. And I think you have to just understand that there is no such thing as pleasing everybody, because if you're bending over backwards to please a young person and to please a family, then you end up in an intervention that's very unsatisfying as a practitioner. And I think over kind of my time in CAMHS, what I've realised is when I've got those kind of little red flags going in the back of my mind as I'm going into an intervention, when I don't kind of address those early on, I end up being kind of 11 sessions into an intervention where no change is happening. The child is stuck, the family's stuck, the intervention's stuck. And then you have to have those really tough conversations of, we're going to end, or we might end, or this needs to change, or we need, you know, another service to kind of come alongside us. And they're the worst conversations. They're really hard. So, you know, when you have those kind of red flags at the start, what experience has shown me is like to have those conversations early on, and because then you get a caseload of young people who actually want to be there, who actually want to do the work as well. Or, you know, and that's not to say like, if you're not ready for therapy, you can't come, or if your child says they don't want to be here, they can't be seen. It's not hard and fast like that. But you need to like be laying the groundwork of those conversations with parents, because if you're thinking, you know, I'm not sure if this child wants to be here, but let's give it a go. Let's review in 6 sessions. If you've laid that groundwork early on from a place of we're exploring, we're not kind of guaranteeing, then if you get to 6 sessions and actually, kind of hunches have proved correct, then that's much easier. I think as well, I feel very strongly that CAMHS has not a great reputation. And, even kind of working outside of CAMHS for quite a long time, I was totally guilty of being like, oh, what's CAMHS doing? I can't understand their rationale. And I just did not have a good understanding, number one, of what CAMHS did, or what my local CAMHS did. So I had no idea what I was talking about, number one. And number two, I think as a service, kind of historically, we've not done a good enough job of kind of explaining our rationale for the decisions that we make, and the way that we operate. And so no wonder we feel, people misunderstand because we've not explained it in a way. And again, no one likes having those difficult conversations or those challenging conversations where actually we might kind of, as we formulate and we go on, we understand that actually this young person's difficulties are not located within them. It's actually located within the wider system. And that's what needs to shift, because it's really unethical to tell a child of 12, 13, 14 years to say, oh, you've got some organic cause that's caused this depression or caused this kind of anxiety, when actually we're not taking into consideration the kind of environment that they're living in.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Just hearing you talk there. I mean, I'm sure, are all aware of the analogy of the elephant in the room, but when you're taught that at a young age, no one ever tells you that the elephant just keeps growing, right?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Sam, that I'm actually quite ashamed to say that I know very little about CAMHS, and it was something that happened in the service that I manage a few weeks ago that led me to reach out to the CAMHS team for the first time, and I've been there for nearly 3 years now, for the first time, to ask them if they would come and talk to us at one of our team meetings about CAMHS, because actually what I know about CAMHS you could write on the back of a postage stamp. What I hear is the difficulties that CAMHS are facing around wait times and, kind of experiences that we're all having in mental health services, but we're getting the negative, and we're getting the people who've waited or had CAMHS support and then come into adult services. We have the battles where we've got the 16-year-old clients and nobody really knows where they fit. And that obviously has shaped the way that I view children and adolescent mental health services. And that's not okay, is it? It's not okay. We need to have dialogue about, the amazing work that's happening in CAMHS, in all mental health services, where we're facing enormous pressures. You said earlier about, recruitment being problematic and moving into things like fixed term contracting and some of those things that we're starting to see come into lots of areas in the NHS. It's very worrisome. We talk a lot about retention of staff, but we don't do anything really to make it happen. Yeah, so it was a reflection really, rather than a question for you, but just that I have been inspired to reach out to my CAMHS colleagues, because that's what we are, aren't we? We're colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do the same work and we want the same thing for the people that we support. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really pleased to hear that. I think, so much has been done, I think, over the last few years. I can only speak to the kind of environment that I'm in, but it has been a real move away from kind of long-term flexible support into much more structured evidence-based support. And, something that gets shared in almost MDTs in different clinics is we're supposed to be a footnote in a child's life, not a whole chapter. And that's a move away from kind of 2 years of coming to CAMHS to see someone. For some young people, having an emotionally available adult is the intervention that they need. So I'm not poo-pooing that at all. But for other young people, it makes sense that they're not seeing change because they're not having kind of an evidence-based treatment for the difficulty that they're having or that they're experiencing. So we have very much moved to much more structured interventions that align with an evidence base. But I suppose, perhaps the next step is being able to communicate that better with families. And if we have, say, 7 or 8 different types of therapies that we're commissioned to deliver, when a young person comes and doesn't neatly fit into one of those categories, it's really tricky then to know, like, well, what is the support that they need and how can we give that? How can we offer choice while also remaining faithful to the evidence base? And that's a real kind of a difficult line to walk, and not one that we always get right. And there has to be space for flexibility as well. We can't just say 12 sessions for PTSD and then you're out, because that's not the way that people work, is it? That's tricky.
The reason you may have seen me making those interesting faces while you were talking just there, and for listeners, because I appreciate that, didn't really come across well in an audio podcast, but I was making facial expressions that hopefully conveyed a sense of perplexity and knowing at the same time, because it seems like the challenges that you guys are experiencing with children and young people tend to bleed across incredibly prevalently to what we experience in adult services as well. I'm keen to explore a bit more of the landscape with you and more about your role, but before we do, just kind of pulling us back to the training journey. Obviously, when we did our high intensity CBT training, which already for me feels like a really long time ago, we had to submit case studies, we had to do recordings. What does that stuff look like on a CYP course?
Pretty much exactly the same. So we have to record our sessions, take them to practice tutor groups, and submit whole session recordings as well. But again, it's kind of tricky to get consent, because you need consent from the young person, but you also need consent from their family, depending on their age. But to be honest, actually, in my training year, I did not struggle to get consent to record. But ever since then, since qualifying, no one wants to let me record. It's really frustrating, because I desperately want to take some clips to supervision. But yeah, so it's very much the same. So recording the sessions, submitting case studies, treatment overviews, reflections, and whole session recordings to be marked as well. Okay. Yeah, it's very similar.
There's an emergence in adult courses at the moment of what they are calling co-therapy, which is students shadowing sessions. Is that something that's also filtered across to children and young people's courses too?
I think at the moment, I mean, I can only speak to my experience. It's a kind of service dependent. I think the expectation is that is something that would happen within your own service. It's not like a requirement, as far as I'm aware, of the kind of training course. But if you have the opportunity to do that in your service, oh my gosh, absolutely do it. And don't stop doing that once you've qualified. Like, some of my best sessions where I've learnt the most is kind of coming alongside someone else, either another CBT therapist or someone of another modality. Even in initial assessments or duty assessments, like, oh my gosh, they've been so eye-opening for me. So I'm very much pro co-therapy. I think you learn a lot.
Definitely. Stepping into the role as you're in now, one of the initial motivators for you to pursuing this career, I mean, you mentioned what I thought was quite a poignant statement earlier on of, I couldn't be the teacher I wanted to be, I couldn't be the parent that I wanted to be, and now you found yourself in this industry, in this career path. And I am wondering if those areas of your life that you've wanted to see change have changed in response to this pathway. How would you say that this has changed you as a person?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. People always ask me if it was stepping out of the frying pan and into the fire, coming to the NHS. I have absolutely not found that to be the case. My workload is significantly lower as a therapist than it was as a teacher, just putting it out there. And Ofsted are a lot more scary than the CQC. They are both very, very important, but on a personal level, when we had an inspection recently, I was like, why aren't people scared? I think we're supposed to be scared, aren't we? But that probably speaks to, trauma that needs addressing later on. When I started in CAMHS, day one, I was like, oh, these are my people. I'm working with my kind of people. And for the first time, it was a sense of homecoming for me. I was around people who kind of spoke and thought about children in the same way that I did, who kind of found the same things interesting. And I just, absolutely knew that I was where I was supposed to be. In terms of work-life balance, it is really difficult. I currently work part-time, and I think that is something that I would probably continue for as long as I can, because it is a really intense job. The stakes definitely feel higher working in mental health. I mean, as they should, it's, for some young people, it actually is a matter of life and death. And I take that responsibility really, really seriously. So I think probably the 3 a.m. wake ups with the worries, I have a little bit more of these times now. However, I also have the structure and containment within my team and the processes to follow rather, to kind of seek support. And what I love about working in CAMHS is that you are not alone. You work in a multidisciplinary team. So those questions about risk, those things that you're worried about, is not something you hold by yourself. That is shared amongst the team, and that is shared, with people who are much more experienced than you are, who have seen things come and go. And that is so containing. I feel pretty safe as a practitioner at the moment, because I definitely have this sense of us all being in it together, which, I'm really grateful for.
I don't think it's a surprise to Ravi, Sam, but we have a lot of teachers in adult mental health accessing service. It's a very common occurrence for us to have several people working in education on our caseloads at any one time. That's not a surprise to us. And I think the other thing you said there was that the stakes are higher. I don't know. Surely you were always working with mental health. You were just doing it in a kind of maybe by proxy, but As
I always had CAMHS to refer to, though.
That's it.
And now I'm like, oh, they're referring to me. No.
There was a step up. Yeah, absolutely. But I think I can't imagine having, people captive as an audience for the most part, even if they do heckle, and all of the things that they're living, you're still holding for 6.5 hours every day. So, I hear what you're saying about the kind of ability now to have that one-to-one time with a child, just for their mental health, just for their mental well-being. It must feel so rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I feel, look, I just really want to make it clear that I'm having a really good experience in my role. I'm in a really supportive team, and I know not everybody has this experience of coming to CAMHS, number one, but also like working within CAMHS. It is really difficult. And I did have quite a difficult experience as a teacher. So I feel that, I've made absolutely the right decision for me. And that is just for me. I'm not making a comment on what other people do. But it is a real privilege to kind of build that kind of one-to-one relationship with a young person. But I think it's also given me a lot of perspective to see the important work that goes on in schools. And it's not just the kind of curriculum. I think there was some research by Nurture UK that something like 1 in 3 children within a class setting have moderate social or emotional needs unmet. And that's absolutely staggering. That's 10 in a class of 30. And, children communicate that when they don't have the language to talk about what's going on. They will communicate that in the way that they know how, which is usually through their behaviour, right? And that is exhausting as a teacher, like trying to manage 10, possibly up to 10 at least, kind of dysregulated children and cover a really kind of demanding curriculum. So I think people who work in education, it's not just teachers, it's, TAs, it's lunch dinner ladies, it's the janitor, it's the people on the gate from the moment they walk in. They are also our frontline mental health professionals, and their interactions can kind of make or break a day and a lifetime, a year, a lifetime for children. So, I think this is why I see the value in kind of thinking systemically, even though I work in CBT, is that we all have such a role to play in a young person's life, but also kind of in our community. We all are working together, and what we each do affects the other.
I think as therapists, it is advisable that we examine the context in which the client operates and the wider context of elements that impact on them. And I'm wondering, when it comes to, again, this role that you're in now, could you like describe a typical day in the life of Sam Froudist?
So it's a mixture of kind of one-to-one meetings. We have lots of network meetings or professionals meetings, and then internal meetings as well. But I, for one, absolutely love MDT. I love hearing what other people do. So I think we would typically have 4 contacts a day, and that contact could be a network meeting or a professionals meeting. But, you know, I think 4 contacts is kind of on the lower end of what actually happens within the service. It's often more. But yeah, we will have kind of individual sessions, initial assessments, and we also have 1 day a week duty. So these are our kind of risky children that kind of can't wait for an initial assessment, or who maybe have been discharged from A&E or the crisis team. So there is not kind of an average day, but I think sometimes I think that the balance of actual therapy sessions compared to networking can be a little bit out of whack or not to my liking. I think, you know, we do loads of networking. So that might be working with schools, thinking about kind of reasonable adjustments for special educational needs. I would say the vast majority of young people that come through our service are probably neurodivergent. And so kind of thinking about working with schools to make that environment a little bit better for them. But we're also thinking about kind of interacting with social care. I think a challenge that we're seeing at the moment is lots of children are placed in the southeast who are from out of area, children in care, and that's a real challenge because it adds, you know, quite clearly you can see for some young people that some therapeutic intervention would be really helpful for them. But if we think about how vulnerable they are, they might be in a totally new county, in a new placement with adults that they don't know, and we're expecting them to come into a session and pour their heart out. Like, it's just totally unrealistic for them. And we're seeing, I suppose, a rise in out-of-area children in care being placed in our county. And, you know, that brings up a huge amount of kind of ethical difficulties because we would really like to support this young person, but how do we actually get their consent? And is it actually the right time? And can we make things more unsafe and more unstable by kind of asking them to kind of come into therapy at this time in their lives? It's really difficult. So kind of treading that line, it can be really difficult. And that's one that, you know, you have to lean on your team and the experience of others and kind of supervision, and also fundamentally the voice of the child. And if a child doesn't want to be there, they will show you one way or another. They just won't come, or they'll run off. They do that too sometimes.
How do you manage that?
Well, first I have a quick panic and then I go and get them. That's the short version. I think the long version we would need another podcast for. Maybe.
We'll definitely invite you back on for that one, Sam. Don't worry about that. I'm wondering, I mean, you spoke there once again about the team and the wider support that's available to you. And this is something that you mentioned that you didn't quite have in the previous role you were in, right? From what you said earlier, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you were on the road a lot, kind of, you know, going out to schools, but almost like a one-man band type thing. And I'm wondering what the other differences are that you see in this role compared to the role you were in previously.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely had a team and I had a lovely supportive manager, but I suppose we just didn't have the process and the structure in the same way that I have now. And I think that's the difference, is that it's kind of multidisciplinary thinking is kind of built into the model in CAMHS, where maybe it wasn't necessarily multidisciplinary. We were like one discipline kind of thinking together. So we had a very particular style of thinking about children and families. And that's not a wrong style, it just is different. The balance of kind of clinical staff and clinical work and operational work is a little bit different. And so the kind of saying, and I don't know if this is particular to my service or as a rule, is kind of clinically led and operationally enabled. And kind of our operational lead and our clinical lead working together to kind of improve outcomes and deliver this kind of really crucial service. And one can't exist without the other, or one can't exist effectively without the other. And I think I have really enjoyed seeing what that looks like. So having this kind of depth of clinical experience across different modalities. And then, you know, what does that look like? How do we operationalize this? How do we operationalize the decisions that we make about children? How do we hold flexibility in mind, but also ensure that it's not a postcode lottery of who can get a service depending on where you live. It's consistent across the district. And how do we do that how do we make sure that across the team clinicians' workloads are taken into consideration, or that, kind of what we call is high profile cases, or cases that, are really challenging. There's lots of high taken into consideration when thinking about people's workloads as well. And those kind of operational, maybe that speaks to my teacher side. I find that really interesting as well and important to think about, as well as having those kind of therapists who are like, we're here for the children. If this takes 20 sessions, 30 sessions, that's what it takes. Balanced with the kind of other clinicians who are like, faithful to the model is X, Y, Z, and then you're done. So that's been very, very different. And kind of working within the kind of wider NHS landscape, it is very challenging. And kind of to kind of come back to your point earlier, Michelle, about us being colleagues and adults and children working together, neurodevelopmental services working together as well, like holding that in mind. I think that's the best bit about working for the NHS, is that I feel a part of something much bigger than myself. I don't just feel like I'm a one-man band out on my own. I feel a part of something that is absolutely flawed, like, don't get me wrong, but I feel it is absolutely fundamentally a force for good, without getting too kind of philosophical about it.
This leads me to think about some work that I'm trying to do in my service at the moment. I think often you take a peek behind the curtain of the NHS and you realise that it is national in name only. Nothing is connected. People don't talk within one organisation, let alone the tiny little silos that make up this gargantuan thing that we know as the NHS. And sometimes, and as corny as this sounds, you kind of have to be the change you want to see in the world. If you want to see a connection between particular services, or if you want some link to exist, sometimes it's you that has to be prepared to build that bridge yourself where other people may not have built it before. I think sometimes that can be a really scary thing to do, because again, you're thinking, oh my God, big brand NHS, what if someone's already done it and I'm treading on someone's toes? Or what if, I'm being the organizational risk here? Sometimes it's okay to go out on a limb and give something a go. Sometimes risks are worth taking, and as we've had with several guests on the podcast recently, I think that the rallying cry here is don't be afraid to be radical from time to time. We've spoken about the training journey, we've spoken about the role as it is now. What does the future hold for you, Sam? And I suppose, what does this training do in terms of opening doors for your career looking forward?
Well, it has totally changed the trajectory of my career, absolutely. And I was very lucky to kind of fall on my feet in a really fantastic clinic when I first qualified. I don't know if this makes any sense, but for my particular course, because you're not accredited, you kind of qualify at equivalent of a band 6, and you're kind of a real kind of team player, getting in there, doing lots of therapy. And because I had such a good experience in my kind of first clinic, and I was really well supported to kind of do my accreditation process, I've already managed to kind of move up to a band 7 role, and kind of am managing one of the pathways within a different clinic in the southeast. And I'm absolutely loving doing that, because I feel more connected to my clinicians and kind of can see, the work that they're doing, basically, the fantastic work that they're doing. But also it gives me a little bit of time to kind of think more strategically about what I want the offering to look like. And obviously within the kind of constraints of my service and the trust and what we're commissioned to do, but I've got a bit more kind of flexibility, or to be creative, or to kind of test things out to some extent, to a small extent. So that's been fantastic as well. And so I'm really cautious about kind of thinking too far ahead in the future, because I really want to embed the skills that I've got and really want to consolidate and just get more and more experience under my belt. But I think in future, I've been dreaming really about kind of thinking about bringing together all the CBT therapists within my trust to some kind of like amazing CBT conference focused on children and young people. I want to kind of engage in it a bit more kind of nationally as well, but I absolutely love peer supervision. So I'd love to bring the kind of therapists across my trust together to kind of think about what it looks like in our kind of area and our demographic. But that one's still a bit of a pipe dream.
Wow. If anyone is listening who perhaps can help bring that idea together, we would be very happy to be the conduit between you and Sam. So feel free to get in touch with us, hello@twolostsouls.co.uk, and we can connect you with the idea of making that happen, because that sounds really nice. And I think often in these roles, it's this strange mix of finding your tribe, but still feeling somewhat isolated. And I think there's something nice in just being able to collaborate and come together as a group, which is lovely. And you spoke about creativity there, and immediately the question popped up in my mind. I'm presuming that, CAMHS practitioners work with quite a variety in terms of age under their caseloads. How on earth do you adapt the way you communicate about CBT and carry out interventions based on the person, the age of the person that you have in front of you? What works better for some age groups than others?
Yeah, I think probably I have a little bit of advantage having worked with children educationally as well. So I've got that kind of like understanding of how young people learn. But you just ask them, number one, is you ask them. I think in my particular service, if they're 11 or younger, we would do a parent-led intervention. So I'll be working with the parent kind of as an expert, and then they're delivering the intervention to their child. But there are kind of other services that might work, directly with younger children. But kind of how we adapt things, that is absolutely something that's on everyone's lips at the moment because of how much neurodivergence we are working with. So we have to ask them, and that's also about engaging with the evidence base. Lots of the research that's done for children and young people, well, number one, research for CBT is mostly done on adults, and then it is adapted for children and young people. But there is not much evidence or research that's been done on, there is some, but there's not nearly as much as there should be on the kind of efficacy of CBT treatments for neurodivergent young people, and like realistically what those adjustments would look like. So that's when we're absolutely leaning on the networks as well. So these parents as experts, what works for their child, and then thinking about working with education as well, because they are doing some really creative stuff as well. But when working with children and young people, I think about taking something from a concrete to abstract. So we start off with concrete examples. So we might work with vignettes, we might work with stories a bit more, identifying qualities, and then we start to think about how that might apply to the young person as well. So we're taking examples, and then we're thinking about repeating, like just repetition over and over again. I think particularly for, autistic young people, generalising learning can be really difficult. So we might be doing exposures over and over and over again in different contexts, or behaviour experiments in different contexts. And usually I think lots of young people have a pretty good understanding of what their needs are. So I definitely go with asking them first, and then we explore it as we go on. But I think just positioning ourselves in this role of like curiosity and testing things out, and we might discover as we go on that some things work better than others.
Can I ask how well equipped you felt to work with neurodivergence following the course? The reason I ask is that I'm conscious that there are probably lots of adult high intensity practitioners listening in who feel as though they're not really being listened to when they demand training courses to help adapt these things and to cater the treatments they offer to individuals who are neurodivergent. So I'm curious how you developed your knowledge in that area, how much the course itself catered to that side of things.
When I finished the course, I felt really well equipped. And then I started working and suddenly realised I had so much more to learn still. So I think my university did a really good job of like introducing that this is something I should be aware of. But again, lots of the teaching, the vast majority of the teaching, I think, was based on kind of this perfect adolescent who's neurotypical, who's psychologically minded and ready for therapy. And to some extent, it's a bit like your driving test, like mirror signal maneuver. You have to learn the rules so that you know how you can break them. So I'm not sure that can be avoided totally, but it would be really exciting to see how that could be changed kind of for future cohorts as the kind of evidence of working with neurodivergence the research is emerging. I think that's definitely something that we could think about more. And then how did that develop kind of once in service? I think, I looked to experts by experience. I was really fortunate and able to work alongside like an autism anxiety group that we ran in our service. And it really was really eye-opening because, you know, lots of the young people kind of struggled with similar things, but the kind of range of experience of the parents within the room was so diverse. And what really came across was this sense of being misunderstood by services and kind of the feeling as if that there was blame and shame, and that there was a failure of parenting for why their child was presenting in that way. And I think for anxious autistic teens, if I'm going to use that as an example, you know, one of the main things that we're seeing at the moment is school avoidance or school refusal or school can't, not necessarily school won't, but school can't. And that was really eye-opening, as well as kind of working again and again with young people who were just so rigid and you know, can't think in a different way. And I think the consequence of that is we stop necessarily working with the cognitions. If the cognitions aren't going to shift, then we work on the behaviour and we take a more behavioural approach. And I'm not sure that there's any shortcut into getting to that. You have to have that experience of interventions that are stuck and not shifting and unsatisfying for you as a therapist, but, you know, mostly for that young person, like nothing's changing. I'm still thinking in this way. But once we start to think behaviourally, well, what can we do differently? I think, you know, and I just want to be really clear that I'm speaking to my experience. When we start to think behaviourally, if we get to that point where a young person can understand the kind of psychoeducation, can understand the formulation, understands the role that behaving differently will play, and if they still are not prepared to do things differently, that's really useful information for us. It's because they don't want to, or they can't. And I think if they don't want to, then we have to unpick consent there. We unpick how we got to this point and what is it? Is it that this young person's presenting with behaviours that the network around them perceive to be challenging? In which case it is the network that needs to shift, not the young person. And if they can't, but they want to, again, well, if there's a skills deficit there, we can either provide them with the skills. If that's not enough, then we change the environment around a child. So there's a role for personal responsibility, but there's also a role for setting young people up for success. And I think, and you can't do this sort of work without then getting political. You can't. And you have to think about ways in which our education system is and isn't working for the children who are a part of it. But yeah.
To go off what you've said there and get in my allocated one Dr. Richard Bennett quote for the day, sometimes it's about asking the question of what's the function, right? Yeah. And if there's no change, what's the function behind them sticking with that behavioural pattern? Yeah. Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure to explore your career with you, to explore your time on the high intensity course and what things have been like since. To kind of begin wrapping up, when we look back, the Sam that was on the first few weeks of that high intensity CBT course, panicky, you mentioned crying on several occasions, but as a way of dealing with the stuff that was showing up a lot of the time, what would the Sam from back then make of the Sam that's sitting in front of us now, do you think?
I think that Sam would be really excited. I think she'd be excited, and I think she would be relieved, actually, that this wasn't a kind of another sudden wild enthusiasm, that I've had a little bit of staying power with this one, and that also that the decade of my career kind of prior to this has actually culminated in some kind of significant change. So I think there would be some joy there. I think she would be quite proud, but I think mostly she would be relieved.
I'm really glad to hear that. And also, I mean, just hearing your words there as this being like the culmination of something. I mean, there are lots of people who might be listening to this having a bit of a panic about a KSA portfolio, for example. That's kind of what the KSA is, though, right? It's about you paying tribute to all you've been through to get you to this point. And as a final question from me, what would your advice be, either to anyone considering applying to a high intensity course to work with children and young people, or to people who are already on that journey?
Make the most of the opportunity that you've got, like throw yourself into it. And if you're thinking about kind of going on the training, as much as you can, try and get some voluntary experience, because what the course looks like in the training year is really different to the job. And for some people, that suits them down to the ground. And for other people, they get a little bit of whiplash. So get as much experience as you can, and then just absolutely go for it. Just immerse yourself in the CBT world. It's a really rich environment.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam. Where can people find out more about you or the things that you do or anything that you'd like to promote?
Well, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I could talk about this all night. If people want to find me, they can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm kind of hanging out at the moment. But yeah, please share any excellent CBT articles with me. I'll have a little read.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been fantastic.
Well, how refreshing that was in a variety of different ways. Firstly, it was really nice to hear about a different environment rather than just, adult talking therapies all the time. What did you make of that show?
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing about Sam's experiences working with children. It is an area, I wasn't lying when I said that it's an area that I've very little knowledge about. And if I'm being very honest, I'm a little bit scared about the idea of working with children. So it's not something I've ever given a lot of thought to. But I found her just so engaging and knowledgeable about her subject area. It was really, really interesting. And I've got a craving now to actually learn more about the work that goes on with children. Because I don't want to go all Whitney Houston on us here, right? But you think about what's happening at that level. Children are our future. That's what I mean there. You think about the work that's happening in children and adolescent mental health and the impact that that's likely to have on us in adult talking therapies. When they get it right, they really get it right. And the kind of formative years where it's so important. And these might be people that we never see in adult services because of that amazingness that can happen when they're in desperate need of it as very vulnerable young people. So yeah, I think you described her as kind of inspirational.
Yeah, inspirational, definitely. Reflecting with clients that I've seen who often say at some point, I had CAMHS at some point, but it wasn't great. And as Sam alluded to in the interview, CAMHS doesn't always have this great reputation. And it was so inspiring, but also so touching to see someone who just exudes this passion for not only taking care of the clients that fall under her service, but also passion for development, passion for continuous improvement. You could just tell in the way that Sam was talking that this isn't like a one and done thing. This is now a field in which she is committed to developing her knowledge and continuing to change with the times and do the best for the people who sit in front of her on a day-to-day basis. And I found that incredibly emotive to hear, actually. I think particularly as therapists working in an NHS landscape, and particularly therapists working in a landscape which can often be accompanied with burnout, compassion fatigue, it is like finding an oasis in a desert to see someone with just that pure passion for what they do and passion for compassion in terms of understanding the individuals in front of them. One thing that you mentioned as part of the interview was that you had already made steps to build deeper connections with the CAMHS department where you are. Hearing Sam and her thoughts today, how might that change the way you approach that conversation with CAMHS, but how might that change the way you take CAMHS into account within your service in future, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's very interesting. I hadn't chosen to reach out to CAMHS based on us having Sam on as a guest. So that wasn't kind of part of my rationale for doing that. It was really when it just became glaringly obvious that we had a large group of very experienced therapists who felt that they had massive gaps in their knowledge about how best we support our younger adult clients, and me taking some time actually to kind of step back and think, well, what do I know? What wisdom can I impart? Because actually it's not something I've looked into. It's not something that I've spent any time in. So let's get the experts and see what we can do together. A big thing for me, Ravi, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but something that has always troubled me, perhaps not enough for me to actually do anything about it though, is the transition from one service to another. And that actually is kind of at all stages of somebody's experience, whether that be from us into a crisis, from a crisis service down back into us, or CAMHS. And those people who, the 15, 16, 17-year-olds who actually may sit in a bit of a no man's land for therapeutic services, how are we helping that transition to be as smooth and, that kind of, I don't know, it sounds like corporate, but, that onboarding of coming across, making that a soft landing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that because, and here's an insight, listeners, into what it's like hosting a podcast. That question was actually on my mind pretty much every single day between scheduling this interview and conducting the interview. Obviously, the day we have the interview is the day that question mysteriously disappears. So first of all, we'll have to obviously invite Sam back on to help us develop our understanding of that. But also, it calls to mind, and I don't know if you'll remember this, but one of the first cases that we had following my qualification as a therapist was about exactly this, essentially just someone being bounced backwards and forwards in an endless loop, basically. And I think you're right in that this is obviously a bigger systemic issue. This isn't just between CAMHS and adult services. But I also think that there are some industries in which we're really failing to take key learnings from. So for example, drug and alcohol. I may get this completely wrong, but drug and alcohol services for young people, I think, extend until their 20s. It's not when you're 18, because understandably at 18, you've got potentially quite a lot of significant life changes going on, potential transitions to university, moves away from the family home, and then you want to add a transition of care in on top of that, which doesn't always work so well. So it's a real shame that we have this other kind of co-industry that's incredibly close to us, and we're not seeing any lessons from how well things have worked for them in terms of the way we change these processes. And I suppose I'm wondering, and I'm conscious that we might not have an answer to this, if you were to design that transition, what would you say it should look like, or what would be the hallmarks of a good transition?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that I would really like to see happen is a kind of waiting list transfer as well, so that we don't have an experience, which again, I've seen lots and lots of times where people have maybe waited, upwards of 2 years to access a service. Then they come of age, then they're told to come to adult services and they start the process again. Why are we not expediting care there? Why are we not having a single point of access where somebody sits on one waiting list and then the most appropriate service contacts them when they're, at the top of that list? So I think that to me feels like a very simple fix. It seems like something we could be doing across CAMHS, adult services and secondary care to some extent. It shouldn't be a factor in a pathway decision. It just shouldn't be how long might somebody wait, and very often it is. The other thing that I really want to see, Ravi, and this is something that really bugs me, is how very unjoined up we are when it comes to crisis care for under 18s. So this will be a kind of national variance, of course it will, but I'm just thinking about my own experience. Our under 18-year-old clients can't access our adult crisis services. They have to go through ICAMHS because the pathway is different. So we're commissioned to offer different things. How can that be? How can we have one mental health trust who can work with, 16 and 17-year-olds in one way, but can't in another? I just think somebody hasn't spoken to somebody there. That's just the very basics for me of joined up seamless working, because to be a patient in a mental health on a mental health pathway is challenging enough without kind of being subjected to all sorts of different rules and regulations about where you can and can't go.
Particularly when it comes to service design, a lot of words are said around trauma-informed care, which a lot of the time means, the person not having to repeat their story over and over again.
Yeah.
There have also been some other wonderful catchphrases such as no wrong door, and it feels to me like we're in this system at the moment which is that there is no wrong door. Oh, except not that one. Yeah, but that's not. Nope, two down. Yeah, that's the one. And I'm wondering what it's going to take, to be honest, for some kind of dramatic shift to take place, because I suppose what I'm really hearing from you there is that the N in NHS really needs to begin standing for something, and there actually needs to be a more consistent sense of care on a national basis, rather than essentially waiting list hopping over and over and over again. If any commissioners or service designers are listening and have any ideas or are planning any radical services that ensure these things, get in touch. We would love to have you on the show to understand what that is going to look like. Any other thoughts on what we've heard today?
Yeah, just let's not wait for let's not do our normal approach of waiting for kind of serious incident to be the catalyst to drive service transformation level changes. I think, listen to the people on the shop floor. We work it. Ask us what works. Ask us how we can make this kind of work for our patients. And that's why we're all here. So I would say that. And I'd also say, if that's okay, I'm on a bit of a rant now. When we're thinking about the curriculum, so for high intensity training, there's quite a good focus now on working with older adults. There's no focus on working with younger people. And it is not an unusual situation for adult services to work with 16 plus. So we need to address that. We need to talk about language adaptation. We need to talk about materials, how we can access, young adult friendly material. Because we're already working very hard to try and accommodate the kind of increase in neurodivergent clients that are accessing services, when we also have to take into account that they're under the age of 18 and we've got a whole host of other things to consider. It would be really helpful if we had some, CPD opportunities, some training, or even if it was just part of the national curriculum. I know it's only just been overhauled, but if you are listening, Mr. Clark, and you want to add in a little bit, that would be amazing. I think that would be incredibly valuable.
Definitely. You made a brilliant point about language there as well, which in my mind reminds me of a client I once worked with who, used a lot of young people speak and modern vernacular words, including slay, for example. And even that, like, as much as we're kind of joking about that in the here and now, the way that client was using that word in the session, it fulfilled a function. And I think a lot of the time it's, as we would do with any other client, it's about stopping and asking. I noticed you did that there. Can you just explain like what was happening for you in that moment?
And don't do what I've done before, Ravi, which is, as a very middle-aged woman, try and talk to people, on their level, because actually you just sound like a knob, right?
What is it that you sounded like at the time, Michelle? What is it that
I don't know, Ravi, but I think I might have used words like, "Oh, that's so cool."
Cool is fine. What's wrong with cool?
Is it? That's I don't think cool's been cool since about 1982. But wouldn't it be nice if somebody gave us some guidance on, not patronizing 16 and 17-year-olds? Let's kind of have some guidance on how we can relate without trying to emulate their language. I've got a teenager, and that's a source of fun for me, would be to, kind of highlight young people's slang and use it back at him because it's so cringy. But we need help. We do need help. in doing this. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And for any young people listening, Shell is making it abundantly clear that she's got the riz. You're right in that even the kind of non-verbal stuff, a young person's context is very different by virtue of them being young, and here they are sitting in what may be an incredibly stuffy room in front of this clinician they've never met before. I can imagine that for some young people it almost feels like, well, life wasn't kind of meant to end up this way. I'm not really meant to be in this room right now. I should be, off doing my studies or having a really good time with my mates, and yet I'm in here. And that kind of self-stigma, or even the stigma that continues around mental health, can show in a variety of different ways when encountering young people in the therapy room. So CPD would be appreciated. And as we said earlier, never be afraid to ask. That professional curiosity is what gets us results at the end of the day. In terms of how you all felt about this episode, listening wherever you are, please get in touch with us. Let us know any comments, questions, thoughts, concerns at hello@twolostsouls.co.uk. As usual, a massive thank you to all of you for listening, and we will see you once again very shortly on another episode of Two Lost Souls.